In 1922, archaeologists opened King Tutankhamun's tomb. Among the gold, jewels, and ancient treasures, they found something unexpected: sealed jars of honey. 3,000 years old. They opened one jar. The honey was still perfectly edible. Now consider this: the honey in your cupboard probably won't last 3 years, let alone 3,000. Leave it long enough, and it'll ferment, separate, or develop off flavors. What's the difference? The answer reveals something profound about what we've lost, and what medieval beekeepers understood about creating honey that could literally last millennia. In medieval Europe, honey wasn't just food. It was medicine. Monastery infirmaries used honey to treat open wounds. Surgeons applied it to injuries that would otherwise lead to fatal infections. Viking traders took jars of honey on month-long sea voyages because it never spoiled, even in humid ship holds. This wasn't superstition. In 1983, researchers at the University of Waikato in New Zealand ran a fascinating experiment. They compared the antibacterial effects of commercial supermarket honey with honey from traditional, unheated beehives managed using historical methods. The commercial honey showed little to no antibacterial effect. The traditional honey killed multi-resistant Staphylococcus bacteria that were immune to modern antibiotics. The effect was so powerful that hospitals began using medical-grade honey for wound treatment. But here's the thing: this medical honey isn't what you buy in stores. It comes from bees kept on specific plants, is cold extracted, never heated, and costs 10 times as much as regular honey. Medieval honey was essentially medical-grade honey, every single jar. Not because beekeepers were trying to make medicine, but because they didn't know how to ruin it. The medieval beekeeping method. Medieval bee colonies were wild or semi-wild. They lived in hollow trees, straw structures called skeps, or simple wooden boxes without movable frames. The bees themselves chose where to build their combs, how large to make the cells, and when to swarm. The beekeeper barely intervened. He set up the hive, protected it from bears and thieves, and once a year, in late summer, he removed some of the combs. That was it. The bees built according to their own instincts, not standardized industrial frames. Medieval bees fed on whatever was blooming in their environment: wildflowers, herbs, trees, shrubs. A medieval beehive in a German forest collected nectar from over 200 different plant species: linden, willow, blackberry, clover, thyme, lavender, fruit trees. Each plant contributed different enzymes, pollen, essential oils, and phytochemicals. The result was honey of incredible complexity, hundreds of bioactive compounds working together. Flavonoids, phenolic acids, enzymes like glucose oxidase that produces hydrogen peroxide, a natural antiseptic. This honey was biochemically alive. Compare that to modern commercial beekeeping. Bees are often kept on monocultures: rapeseed, sunflowers, acacia. A single hive is loaded onto a truck and transported to massive fields where millions of identical plants bloom. The bees collect nectar from one source. The result is honey that's chemically simple, high in sugar but with almost no phytochemical diversity. No complexity. No layered healing properties. The winter feeding problem. Here's where it gets more troubling. Medieval beekeepers always left enough honey in the hive for the bees to survive winter. They understood that bees needed their own honey to stay healthy. Many modern commercial beekeepers maximize harvest and replace the bees' food with sugar syrup, especially in winter or when the honey harvest has been too large. Sugar syrup is cheaper than honey. So beekeepers take the honey and give the bees industrial sugar. The bees store this sugar in the combs, mixed with real honey. What you buy is a blend of genuine nectar and processed sugar that bees should never have collected in the first place. The processing catastrophe. Medieval honey was harvested in one of two ways. Either the combs were cut from the hive, placed in cloth over a bowl, and allowed to drip at room temperature. Or the combs were gently crushed by hand and pressed through linen. That was it. No heat. No machines. The honey flowed cold from the combs, filtered only through coarse fabric that retained pieces of wax and dead bees but allowed pollen, propolis, and all bioactive substances to pass through. This honey was cloudy, viscous, often interspersed with fine wax particles. It crystallized after weeks or months, depending on the nectar source. And that was good. Crystallization is a sign of real, unprocessed honey. It shows the honey has high glucose content, which naturally forms crystals. The modern industrial process. Modern honey goes through an industrial chain that transforms it completely. First, it's centrifuged, spun at high speed to extract honey from the cells. That alone isn't the problem. The problem is what comes next. The honey is heated to 60, 70, sometimes 80 degrees Celsius. To make it flow faster through filters and pipes. To prevent crystallization, because consumers prefer clear, liquid honey and mistakenly think crystallized honey is spoiled. And to kill yeasts that could ferment the honey. But this heat destroys everything that makes honey valuable. Enzymes like diastase and invertase become inactive above 40 degrees. Glucose oxidase, the enzyme that produces hydrogen peroxide and creates the antibacterial effect, is destroyed at 50 degrees. Vitamins, especially B vitamins and vitamin C, decompose. Antioxidants like flavonoids lose their activity. What remains is sugar. Fructose and glucose, chemically intact but biologically dead. The ultrafiltration problem. Then comes ultrafiltration. The heated honey is pressed through microscopically fine filters that remove not only wax and bee parts, but also pollen. Why remove pollen? Because pollen reveals the geographical origin of honey. If you analyze pollen, you can determine which country, which region, even which valley the honey comes from. The honey industry doesn't want that level of traceability. It makes it too easy to detect adulteration, honey from low-quality sources being relabeled, or real honey diluted with rice syrup, corn syrup, or synthetic sugars. But here's the problem. Pollen is one of the most nutrient-rich components of honey. It contains proteins, amino acids, B vitamins, minerals, and immune-modulating compounds. Honey without pollen is like bread without wheat. It looks like the original, but the substance is missing. What this means for your health. Medieval honey had a low glycemic index, not because it had less sugar, but because the enzymes, proteins, and pollen slowed sugar absorption. When you ate a spoonful of raw, unprocessed honey, your blood sugar rose slowly and evenly. Glucose oxidase continuously produced small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, which killed bacteria in the mouth and throat. The flavonoids had anti-inflammatory effects. Propolis, bee resin contained in trace amounts, strengthened the immune system. Studies of medieval skeletons show significantly lower rates of tooth decay in populations that used honey as their main sweetener compared to later populations that ate cane sugar. Honey wasn't just safe for teeth, it actively protected them. Modern processed honey behaves like table sugar in your body. It causes rapid blood sugar rise resulting in insulin spike and a sudden crash that leaves you hungry and tired with no antibacterial, anti-inflammatory properties. And no active enzymes. You're eating empty calories packaged as a natural product. And because modern honey is often contaminated with pesticides, herbicides, and antibiotics used in commercial beekeeping, you're putting additional strain on your liver and immune system. Tests have found glyphosate residues in over 70% of commercial honey samples in Europe. Glyphosate, the herbicide known to disrupt gut microbiome. The lost knowledge of local honey. Medieval honey was local and seasonal. A village in southern Germany had linden honey in June, forest honey in July, heather honey in August. Each honey tasted different, had different properties, different uses. Linden honey was considered soothing, good for colds. Forest honey, darker and stronger, was used for digestive problems. Heather honey was antiseptic and applied to wounds. People knew their local honeys and understood what they were good for. This knowledge passed through generations, refined by centuries of observation. Today, you buy a jar labeled blossom honey, a meaningless term meaning the honey comes from some flowers somewhere in the world, mixed from dozens of sources to create a standardized taste. No connection to origin. No seasonal variation. No traditional knowledge. Just an industrial uniform product. A 2009 study by the Technical University of Dresden analyzed medieval honey recipes from monastery libraries and compared them with modern products. The medieval recipes described honey with over 300 identifiable aroma compounds. Modern supermarket honeys? Between 40 and 60. These aroma compounds aren't just flavor. They're bioactive molecules that interact with your taste receptors, digestive system, and immune system. Complex honey activates more receptors, sends more signals to your brain, and your body responds with a coordinated digestive and immune response. Simple honey is recognized as simple sugar, and your body treats it exactly that way. Quick energy, no other benefits. Medieval beekeeping was extensive. A beekeeper might have had 5 to 20 hives scattered over a large area. The bees foraged within a 3 to 5 kilometer radius, barely overlapping with other colonies, with access to pristine, pesticide-free landscapes. The honey harvest was modest. A hive produced 10 to 20 kilograms per year, and the beekeeper took perhaps half. The rest stayed with the bees. Modern beekeeping is intensive. Thousands of hives placed close together, often on rented fields. The bees compete for the same flowers, transmit diseases among themselves, and the stress weakens the colonies. Through selective breeding and sugar feeding, harvests of 40, 50, even 60 kilograms per hive are achieved. But the bees are exhausted, disease-prone, and often die in winter. This isn't sustainable beekeeping. It's industrial extraction. Since the early 2000s, bee colonies have been disappearing worldwide. Beekeepers find empty hives, the workers simply gone. The causes are complex. Pesticides, parasites like the varroa mite, viruses, transport stress, intensive farming. But one factor is rarely mentioned. Modern bees are genetically impoverished and nutritionally deprived. They eat low-quality honey or sugar syrup. They collect nectar from pesticide-contaminated monocultures. They're treated with antibiotics that destroy their gut microbiome. Medieval bees had none of these problems. They were wild, genetically robust, fed on diverse clean food, and survived for centuries without human intervention. Bee mortality isn't a natural phenomenon. It's the direct result of how we treat bees. How to find real honey today. If you want honey that heals rather than harms, you have options, but you have to search consciously. Buy raw, cold-extracted honey. Find local beekeepers who keep their bees on wildflower meadows, not monocultures. Ask these questions. Do the bees eat their own honey in winter, or are they fed sugar syrup? Has the honey been heated? Is it filtered minimally? Real raw honey crystallizes. If honey remains liquid for months, it's been processed. Look for pollen. Hold the jar up to the light. If you see tiny particles, that's good. These are pollen and wax residues, signs of minimal filtering. Taste for complexity. Real complex honey has layers of flavor, floral, resinous, sometimes slightly bitter or tart. If it only tastes sweet, it's biologically dead. Or become a beekeeper. Medieval beekeeping isn't complicated. A simple beehive, a straw skep or wooden box, costs little. You don't need expensive equipment. Let the bees build as they please. Intervene as little as possible. Harvest once a year in late summer and take only what's surplus. Cut out the combs. Let the honey drain at room temperature. Store it in jars. You might get 5 or 10 kilograms per year, but this honey will be more potent than anything you can buy. And you'll understand what we've lost. The medieval farmer with his skep and his cloudy, thick honey wasn't primitive. He produced a substance so valuable it was used as currency. A medicine that healed wounds modern antibiotics can't touch. A preservative so powerful it could preserve meat, fruit, even human tissue for centuries. Medieval texts describe honey being used to preserve fallen warriors so their bodies could be transported home. Alexander the Great was allegedly embalmed in honey. That's the power of real honey. The modern honey industry traded all of this for profit, speed, and uniformity. You can choose differently. Every time you buy raw, local, unprocessed honey, you're voting for a better system. You're supporting beekeepers who work with nature instead of against it. And you're giving your body food it recognizes, food that nourishes instead of just filling you with empty calories. The knowledge isn't lost. It's just waiting to be rediscovered.